Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today we're plunging into the pretty profound and, often surprising world of Slavoj Žižek, our source material. Key insights from his really powerful book, The Sublime Object of Ideology. And look, this isn't just a book, it's a bit of a mind bender.
It really is.
It challenges pretty much everything you thought you knew about society, your beliefs, maybe even your own desires.
Yeah.
So let's unpack this.
And our mission here for this deep dive is basically to give you a true shortcut to being, properly well-informed about something that shapes all of us, ideology.
Right.
We're going way beyond the simple idea that it's just false consciousness, or just believing lies. Žižek argues it operates on a much, much deeper level, often unconscious.
Unconscious.
Yeah, actually structuring our very reality. We'll try and connect the dots between fields that seem, totally disconnected sometimes, like philosophy, psychoanalysis, and even everyday stuff like dreams and jokes, all to help you understand these hidden currents that influence us.
Okay, get ready then, because we're going to explore some truly fascinating concepts. We'll unpack why the famous psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan claimed Karl Marx, yes, Marx, and not Freud, actually invented the symptom. We'll discover what canned laughter on TV shows might reveal about the profound truth of our beliefs, sometimes unsettling truths.
Definitely unsettling.
And we'll see how something like a terrifying shipwreck, think the Titanic, can become what Žižek calls a sublime object. Okay, so let's start with that first provocative idea from the sources. Lacan, saying Marx, not Freud, invented the symptom. Now, for anyone who knows the basics of psychoanalysis, this sounds, wild.
It does throw you a bit.
The symptom's usually about a personal psychological struggle, isn't it? So how can Marx's analysis of commodities of all things possibly relate to something so personal, like dreams or, hysteria? That's Freud's turf.
Right. But what's truly illuminating here is the profound parallel Žižek draws. It's between Marx's analysis of the commodity form and Freud's analysis of the dream form. Okay. The key insight, and this is crucial, isn't about some secret content hidden behind the form. It's about the secret of the form itself.
The secret of the form, like how it's structured.
Exactly. Think of it like a magic trick. The real secret isn't just what's in the magician's hidden pocket, but how the whole setup, the presentation, the form, makes you focus elsewhere.
Okay, I think I follow.
It's the structure creating the illusion. So for dreams, it's not just about finding the latent thought, the conscious worry that's bothering the dreamer. The real question is why? Why do those thoughts take on the strange, often bizarre form of a dream?
Right. Why the disguise?
Precisely. And similarly for commodities, it's not simply that labor determines value. The deeper question is why labor can only assert its social character by taking on the commodity form of its product. It has to appear as a thing with value.
Okay.
So in Freud's view, unconscious desire isn't the explicit thought you have. It's something fundamentally repressed, and it expresses itself through the dream work, through the very structure and distortion of the dream. The form is the expression.
That's a fascinating parallel, really.
Yeah.
So it's not about digging out the hidden meaning, but understanding why that meaning takes such a specific, maybe distorted form. It sounds almost like, the medium is the message, even for our unconscious.
In a way, yes. That captures it quite well.
And this leads to another intriguing concept you mentioned from the sources, Alfred Sohn-Rethel's real abstraction. He argued that the commodity form actually contains the anatomy of the Kantian transcendental subject, which, putting that more simply.
Let's simplify.
He's saying there's this deep link between the economic structure, how we exchange goods, and how we as thinking subjects fundamentally perceive reality itself, like a hidden blueprint for our experience.
Exactly, a blueprint. And this real abstraction is crucial because, as Sohn-Rethel puts it, it's not thought, but it has the form of thought.
Not thought, but the form of thought.
Which is basically, a working definition of the unconscious, the kind of thinking process that operates outside our conscious awareness. And the sources highlight this critical paradox. The whole system of commodity exchange, its social effectiveness, actually depends on people not being fully aware of its underlying logic.
So we have to misunderstand it for it to work.
In a sense, yes. This non-knowledge of the reality is part of its very essence. If you really, truly, deeply grasped money as just a social agreement, your behavior around it might completely change. The system relies on that not happening.
Which brings us back to Marx's symptom then. If we see it this way, it's not just some surface problem in society, it's more like a fissure, right? An asymmetry.
A crack in the surface.
That exposes the real, often hidden power dynamics, like domination and servitude, things that got pushed aside with, say, the rise of bourgeois society.
And then reemerged, yeah, but disguised as commodity fetishism.
Right, that weird shift where we obsess over relations between things like money and goods instead of the relations between people that underpin it all.
Exactly. The fetishism moves from people to things.
So what does this mean for you, listening? Well, it means you might know something intellectually. Like, money is just socially agreed upon value.
You know it in your head.
But your actions, how you actually participate in social reality, can reveal a deeper, often unconscious, adherence to a completely different logic, a kind of fetishistic logic. Your behavior tells another story.
Your feet vote differently than your brain, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Now, let's challenge that common idea of ideology as just false consciousness. The idea that it's just believing lies, and once you know the truth, poof, it's gone. Žižek says it's way more insidious.
Yeah, and this is where he brings in cynicism, which is really interesting. The classic Marxian phrase, they do not know it, but they are doing it.
Standard ideology critique.
Well, Žižek adds this crucial twist for our time, our sort of cynical age. People often do know. They know the official ideology is, well, kind of a sham.
They're aware of the hypocrisy.
Totally. They keep this ironic distance. They smirk at it, tell jokes about it. Think about political jokes, right? Yet, crucially, they still are doing it.
So knowing doesn't stop the doing.
Exactly. Think of that Brecht line. What is the robbery of a bank compared to the founding of a new bank? People get the systemic critique. They understand the inherent, maybe, corruption.
But they still participate, use banks, work within the system.
Right. That understanding doesn't actually stop them participating.
So that cynical distance we might feel, that ironic detachment about the system, it doesn't actually dismantle the core, the ideological vanity.
Precisely. It leaves that fundamental level completely untouched. Because ideological fantasy, in this view, isn't some illusion masking reality. It's deeper. It's an unconscious fantasy that actually structures social reality itself.
Structures reality. Okay, take money again. Intellectually, we all know it's just paper or, digital bits, an expression of social relations.
But in our actual behavior, we act as if money is the immediate, natural embodiment of wealth, as if it has some inherent, almost magical power. We treat it as if it is value.
So we're acting out of belief we consciously reject.
That's it. We are, as the sources say, fetishists in practice, not in theory. Our social actions are guided by this deep, unconscious illusion, even if our conscious minds say, nah, that's silly.
Right. People know money's just paper, but they act like it's got this inherent power. It's a tricky concept to really grasp day to day, isn't it? How does that as if work in simpler terms for the listener?
Well, think about Pascal's idea, which Žižek uses. Belief isn't just some internal feeling. It gets materialized, it becomes real through our actual social activity.
Like actions speak louder than thoughts.
Kind of. Our social reality is this ethical construction, and it's supported by an as if. We act as if we believe in certain things, the value of money, the authority of institutions, and that collective acting is what gives them their power, what makes them real for us.
Okay, the acting makes it real. Can you give another example?
Yeah, the example of canned laughter on TV shows is perfect.
Yeah.
Really clear. The laugh track.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes annoying.
Right. But think about its function. Like the chorus in ancient Greek tragedy, it performs the required emotion for us. We, the viewers, might be tired, distracted. Maybe the joke wasn't even that funny, but the soundtrack lasts. It fulfills the social obligation of amusement for us. We participate by hearing the laughter, fulfilling our duty to find it funny. Even if we don't feel the laughter inside, we're laughing as if it's funny.
And that as if is key for the show's effect. Okay. It allows the social transaction of humor to happen.
And this extends to something like, say, Kafka's nightmarish bureaucracy. It's not just a distorted picture of reality.
No, it is the reality. In a way, it's the actual mise en scène, the staging, the performance of the fantasy that regulates how bureaucracy actually functions. We interact with it as if it's this all-powerful, impenetrable thing, even if we intellectually know it's just, flawed people and procedures. The fantasy gives it its weight. Right. We treat the rules as absolute, even when they seem absurd.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it relates to the Lacanian real, that raw, messy, often traumatic part of existence that symbols and language can't quite capture.
The unnameable stuff.
Yeah. Ideology, then, doesn't offer an escape from reality in the simple sense. It offers social reality itself as an escape from some traumatic real kernel.
Social reality is an escape from reality. That sounds paradoxical.
It is. The sources use Freud's dream example, the father burning dream. The father dreams his dead son is burning, tells him, "Father, can't you see I'm burning?" He wakes up. Why? Freud suggests, and Žižek picks up on this, he wakes up not just to escape the external reality of the candle setting the shroud alight, but to escape the terrifying internal reality of his own desire, the unbearable wish, perhaps, that his son was still alive, confronting him. The dream brought him too close to that traumatic kernel.
Wow. So the dream was too real, in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Leading to that provocative line, reality is for those who cannot support the dream. Our structured social reality, our ideology, protects us from the more intense, unbearable reality of the real, of our raw desire.
Okay. Wow. Speaking of the unconscious and its expressions, the sources also talk about how Lacan's idea of the symptom evolved, leading to this concept of the symptom.
The symptom, yes.
It sounds like symptom, but different, more fundamental.
Yeah.
What exactly is a symptom?
It's a fascinating and kind of difficult concept. Think of it as, well, like a central, knotted core of meaning and enjoyment. It's a signifying formation, a pattern of meaning, but it's saturated with joyous enjoyment.
Enjoyment, like pleasure.
Not necessarily pleasure. It can be painful, even disgusting. But it's an intense charge, a kind of fundamental satisfaction or attachment that holds our very being together. The sources literally call it our only substance.
Our only substance.
Yeah. The point that gives consistency to us as subjects. Without this core symptom, there's, well, nothing. Total disintegration.
So unlike a regular symptom we might want to get rid of.
Exactly. A symptom is problematic, sure, but the symptom, its absence, would be total catastrophe. It's like the joke about the newspaper editor. He's terrified his paper sales will drop while he's away. That's his anxiety, his symptom. But he's even more terrified that they won't drop. Because if the paper does just fine without him, what does that say about his importance? His whole identity is tied up in that anxiety. That anxiety is his symptom.
His necessary flaw.
Precisely. And Žižek uses these really striking, visceral examples, like the kid's horrific, inexplicable wound in Kafka's A Country Doctor, or Amfortis's eternally festering wound in Wagner's Parsifal. These aren't just problems. They're presented as pure symptoms.
How so?
They're these disgusting, nauseating embodiments of meaningless, yet somehow vital enjoyment. They're repugnant, but absolutely central to the character's existence and identity. Take the wound away, and Amfortis ceases to be Amfortis.
So it's this unpleasant truth, maybe a core flaw, but it's absolutely essential to who we are. Removing it would unravel everything.
Yeah, that's a powerful twist on the idea of a symptom. It connects to ideological jouissance, doesn't it?
It does.
This idea that even something like Kant's stern moral law, the imperative to do your duty, might conceal an obscene superego injunction. Enjoy.
Exactly. It's not just do your duty because it's right. There's often a hidden, perverse command to enjoy the sacrifice, enjoy the obedience itself.
Even if the enjoyment is painful or involves giving things up?
Yes. And this raises questions about things like, say, fascism. It often presents this purely formal imperative, obey because you must, just obey.
No real content, just the command.
Right. Its power seems to come from that very emptiness, its formal character. The value of the sacrifice, the obedience, lies in its very meaninglessness. Just doing it is the point. The consistency of the ideological attitude itself, that unwavering commitment, becomes the true hidden goal.
Like that Descartes idea you mentioned. Yeah, walking straight in the forest, even if you chose the direction randomly, the consistency, the adherence to the form is everything. The meaning is secondary or even non-existent.
Okay. Let's shift gears slightly to another really key concept for Žižek, the lack in the other, and that really unsettling question, je vois, which means...
What do you want?
What do you want? It sounds personal, but it seems to have huge social implications in this framework.
Absolutely. And tied into this is the idea of the point de capiton, the quilting point.
Quilting point, like on a mattress.
Exactly like that. Imagine words like freedom, justice, democracy just floating around, meaning different things to different people. They're floating signifiers.
Okay.
The point de capiton is like that button on the mattress. It's a master signifier, a nodal point, that pulls these floating signifiers together and fixes their meaning within a specific ideological field.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Take communism as a quilting point. If you quilt freedom through that point, it stops floating. It gets a specific meaning, like true freedom from exploitation or real democracy, which is then contrasted with, say, bourgeois formal democracy.
So it anchors the meaning.
Right. It acts as a rigid designator, like Kripke's examples of gold or unicorn. The word points to the same thing, maintains its identity, even as our understanding or the context changes. And the sources, interestingly note, these examples often have a libidinal connotation. They relate to desire.
Why desire?
Because the quilting point often promises some kind of fulfillment, some answer to our lack, but like the real object of desire, the actual political reality often disappoints. It's never quite it.
And that brings us back to tu vois, what do you want from the other?
Yes. This is that unanswerable question that seems to come from the other, from society, from authority, from the symbolic order itself. It represents this terrifying gap between what's explicitly said or demanded and what is really truly desired underneath.
A hidden demand.
Yeah. The sources give these stark, maybe uncomfortable examples, like the sort of ill-famed male chauvinist wisdom that woman is a whore or that politics is also a whore.
Well, to the point there.
It implies that beneath the surface demands or appearances, there's a hidden, maybe contradictory desire at play. What do you really want from me? That troubles the explicit relationship.
Okay. And Hitchcock, you mentioned him earlier.
Right. North by Northwest is a perfect illustration. Roger Thornhill, the protagonist, gets mistaken for someone else. George Kaplan, a non-existent secret agent. He's given this arbitrary symbolic role.
Pinned to a signifier, as you said.
Exactly. And he's constantly confronted by the other's terrifying question, what do you want from me? What are you really up to? Even though he doesn't know. It mirrors that fundamental human condition of being thrown into roles and expectations without fully grasping the underlying desire of the other.
And fantasy comes in here as an answer.
Yes. Fantasy, which Lacan represents as the barred subject confronting the object of desire, functions as a kind of protective screen or scenario. It's an answer to that unbearable chevoir.
So it tells us how to desire.
Precisely. It's not just an imagined daydream. It's the very framework, the lens that allows us to organize our world and experience desire in the first place. Think of Rear Window again.
The window.
Hitchcock's window is explicitly called a fantasy window. It structures Jimmy Stewart's desire. And Grace Kelly only becomes truly desirable to him when she literally climbs into that frame, becoming part of his fantasy scenario.
She enters his fantasy.
Okay.
This feels like it's leading towards the Lacanian subject, the subject of the real, characterized by internal exclusion. And this claim, there is no metalanguage.
Right. There is no metalanguage. It sounds technical, but it's a radical point about language. It means there's no ultimate objective language outside of language itself that can perfectly map onto reality.
No God's eye view.
Exactly. Language isn't transparent. It doesn't just point to pre-existing things. It's always kind of elliptical, moving around a central void, a fundamental gap. And that gap is embodied by the objet pitié.
The little object A.
The cause of desire.
Yes. It's the elusive object that sets desire in motion but can never be fully grasped by language. The sources use some great jokes to illustrate this.
Like the Lenin one?
Yeah, the Lenin in Warsaw joke. The painting supposedly shows Lenin in Warsaw, but it actually depicts his wife in bed with a young party member. Lenin is completely absent from the picture.
Where is he?
He's only present in the title. The title names the lack in the picture. That absence is the object A here, the point around which the meaning and the humor circulates. It's produced by the signifying frame, not pictured within it.
Okay, that's clever. And the other joke, the conscript. Right, the conscript trying to get out of the army. He needs a warrant of release. He keeps searching, failing, getting sent from office to office. But through that very process, that signifying chain of bureaucratic runaround, he eventually produces the warrant. The object is created by the search itself.
The object doesn't pre-exist the process. Okay, this connects somehow to freedom. The idea of freedom as real impossible. That sounds quite bleak.
It's a paradox. There's this compelling anecdote in the sources about a Yugoslav soldier during Tito's era. He's asked to sign an oath of loyalty freely.
Okay. Standard procedure, maybe.
But he refuses. He insists, give me an order to sign it. He doesn't want the burden of free choice because that would make the loyalty his subjective decision, his responsibility. He wants it to be an external command.
So he refuses freedom.
He refuses the illusion of free choice offered by the system. It highlights this fundamental forced choice we often face. You're free to choose, yes, but only if you choose the right thing, the thing the system wants you to choose.
Choose freedom by obeying.
Exactly. And paradoxically, the sources suggest the truly free subject in this situation, the one who isn't caught in this bind, might be the psychotic one.
Why psychotic?
Because the psychotic subject in Lacanian theory maintains a distance from the symbolic order, they aren't fully caught in its web of meanings and forced choices. They aren't playing the game by the same rules. They aren't constrained by the freedom the system dictates.
Wow, okay. And tying this back even deeper to our very being, there's Schelling's idea of a temporal, unconscious choice of evil.
Yeah, this really deep philosophical idea that our fundamental character, whether we lean towards good or evil, isn't just a result of our life choices, but stems from some kind of eternally past, transcendental choice made before we were even conscious.
As if our fundamental nature was set from before time.
Something like that, a radical notion about the roots of subjectivity.
And Hegel comes back in here too, with that very strange phrase, the spirit is a bone.
Ah, yes, a classic Hegelian speculative proposition. Žižek gives it a Lacanian reading. The point isn't the immediate, literal meaning, spirit is obviously not a bone.
Right.
The truth emerges from the failure of that first reading. The inert, dead skull bone represents the ultimate failure of the subject to be fully captured or represented by signs, by language.
The limits of representation.
Exactly. It reveals the subject not as some lofty consciousness, but as the very impossibility of its own signifying representation. The bone is the leftover, the remainder, the real kernel that language can't digest. It points to that raw, pre-symbolic core of our being.
That's a striking image. A skull representing the failure of spirit to represent itself.
Yeah.
Okay. This idea of failure, form, and the symbolic order leads to another really arresting claim. Language is a Stalinist phenomenon, especially the language of flattery. What on earth does that mean?
It's provocative, for sure. It relates to that historical shift moving from, say, feudal loyalty based on silent service
Doing your duty without question.
to the modern state, where heroism of silent service becomes the heroism of flattery. Think about courtly manners or bureaucratic language, or even in extreme forms, political declarations of loyalty.
Okay, but why flattery?
Because this flattery is often empty. It involves a public performance, maybe even a renunciation of one's private convictions, all for the sake of the cause or the monarch or the party. It becomes an ethical act, paradoxically, precisely because it involves this radical voidance of our personality.
Emptying yourself out for the system.
Yes. You sacrifice your inner truth, your individual substance, leaving only the empty form of the subject that adheres to the external demand. It's not about what you believe, it's that you perform the belief publicly.
And Stalinist confessions.
Are presented as the most extreme, horrific example of this. People confessing to crimes they didn't commit, betraying everything they stood for, precisely to uphold the empty formal authority of the party. They sacrifice their subjective truth entirely for the symbolic order, for the big other.
That's chilling. And this all boils down finally to the empty gesture as the fundamental ideological move.
Yes, the empty gesture. It's truly pivotal in this whole framework. It's that initial act of symbolization, the drawing of a line, the imposing of a meaning onto the chaos of the real.
Like naming something or making a promise.
Exactly. It's the gesture that transforms raw, pre-symbolic reality into a world of meaning. And in doing so, it effectively posits or creates the big other, that shared symbolic order, the network of rules and meanings we live within.
It creates the reality we inhabit by naming it.
Right. And psychoanalysis, particularly in its final stages, aims to reverse this process through what Lacan calls subjective destitution.
Subjective destitution.
It involves annulling the effects of that initial formal conversion. It's about recognizing and accepting the non-existence of the big other, that there's no ultimate guarantee, no final meaning maker behind the curtain.
Accepting the void.
Yes. Accepting the real in its utter meaningless idiocy. It's a radical undoing of the very mechanism that constructs our comforting social reality, a willingness to confront the raw, unsymbolized truth without the usual ideological filters.
Wow. We've certainly journeyed through some seriously mind-bending territory today, haven't we?
We definitely have.
This deep dive into Zizek's The Sublime Object of Ideology. It really shows that ideology is so much more than just, a set of beliefs we happen to hold.
Far more.
It's like this fundamental, often unconscious structure that shapes our social reality, our desires, how we see freedom, even how we perform our roles every day.
And hopefully understanding these concepts, even getting a taste of them, allows you, the listener, to see the world and maybe your own part in it with a bit more clarity. a new perspective.
Yeah, it's like getting that shortcut you mentioned to being really well informed about these hidden currents in society.
Right. Recognizing the powerful, often unseen forces and fantasies that are constantly at play, shaping our experience.
So, as you go about your day, maybe consider this final provocative thought. What empty gestures might you be unconsciously performing in your own life? Your job, your relationships, your interactions. Gestures that uphold the as-if of social reality.
Gestures that keep the symbolic order running smoothly.
And what might happen if you, well, if you stopped, if you, like that subject and subjective destitution, just stop making them. What would it mean to face that utterly meaningless yet profoundly real truth beneath it all? Something to think about.